Istanbul, Topkapi Palace. The 3rd day of March, 1623. Dawn. Light filters through lattice windows of the imperial harem, painting geometric shadows across marble floors that have witnessed 3 centuries of Ottoman power. The palace is waking. Servants move through corridors with practiced silence. Eunuchs take positions at doorways they have guarded for decades. The machinery of empire begins its daily operation, but from behind, golden-laid doors in the eastern wing, a sound disrupts the careful order. A scream. Not the brief cry of someone startled or injured. This is sustained horror, the kind of sound that comes from someone experiencing something that breaks them at a fundamental level. The servants in the corridor freeze. They have been trained since childhood to notice nothing, to hear nothing, to know nothing about what occurs behind closed doors in the imperial harem. But this scream penetrates even the most disciplined indifference. A senior eunuch named Sulian moves toward the door. He has served in the palace for 42 years. He has seen everything the Ottoman system produces: births and deaths, poisonings and assassinations, the rise and fall of favorites, the systematic destruction of princes who threaten succession. Nothing surprises him anymore. But when he opens the door, even his carefully maintained composure falters for just a moment, just long enough for the younger servants to notice. Inside the chamber, a young woman sits on the floor amid silks and cushions that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Her name is Fatma Sultan. She is 16 years old. She is the daughter of Sultan Ahmed I, which makes her one of the most powerful women in the empire by blood. Yesterday, she was married to a grand vizier twice her age in a ceremony that lasted 6 hours and cost enough to feed a city for a month. This is the morning after that wedding. This is what no official record will ever directly describe. This is the reality that exists in the gap between the ceremonial magnificence that histories document and the human experience that they systematically exclude. Fatma is wearing the wedding garments that took a dozen women 3 months to create. The fabric is torn. There is blood on the silk, not the symbolic blood that wedding night customs across many cultures expected and celebrated. This is different. This is the evidence of something that was not supposed to leave evidence. The eunuch takes in the scene with one glance. He has seen this before. Not often. Most princesses learn during their preparation what to expect and how to endure it. But occasionally, despite all the conditioning, despite all the careful training and submission that begins years before any marriage is arranged, a young woman enters the wedding chamber with insufficient psychological preparation for what the transition from imperial daughter to wife of a powerful pasha actually entails. "Summon the physician," Suleiman says quietly to a servant. "Tell him the princess has developed a fever. Tell him discretion is required." The language is code. The servants understand. A fever that requires discretion means psychological breakdown that must be concealed. The physician will bring medicines that dull consciousness. He will prescribe rest in isolation. He will document the illness in terms that reveal nothing about its actual cause, and life in the palace will continue as though nothing unusual has occurred. This is not cruelty in the sense that the word usually implies. This is the Ottoman system functioning exactly as designed. Fatma Sultan was not harmed by violation of protocol. She was harmed by the protocols themselves, by the carefully constructed mechanisms that transformed imperial daughters into instruments of political alliance through marriages that served state interests while destroying individual lives. But here is what makes this moment remarkable. What happened to Fatma was not unique. It was not the action of one cruel individual. It was systematic practice that emerged from the intersection of political necessity, religious interpretation, cultural tradition, and the particular genius of Ottoman administration. The same genius that built an empire spanning 3 continents also built the mechanisms that controlled royal women with such precision that their suffering became invisible to history. Tonight, you will discover what happened behind those gold-inlaid doors, the preparation processes that began years before any wedding, the conditioning techniques that transformed princesses into compliant wives, the wedding night rituals that serve purposes beyond consummation, the aftermath that princesses endured in silence, the documentation that exists in fragments and codes because direct description was forbidden, the pattern that repeated across generations because the system required it. This is not Orientalist fantasy. This is not sensationalized fiction. This is documented history pieced together from palace records, medical texts, private correspondence, and the testimony of women who eventually found ways to speak despite the silence that was imposed upon them. The sources exist in Ottoman archives, in the letters of European ambassadors who witnessed ceremonies from outside, in the coded messages that harem women sent to each other, and in the physical evidence of spaces designed for purposes that official records never explicitly named. The Ottoman Empire was one of history's most sophisticated civilizations. Its administrative systems, its architectural achievements, its cultural contributions were extraordinary. And those same systems, that same administrative genius, that same cultural sophistication produced mechanisms for controlling royal women that functioned with precision across centuries. Before we continue, understand that what follows examines systematic control rendered invisible through luxury and ceremony. The horror lies not in chaos, but in order, not in breakdown of civilization, but in civilization functioning according to values that prioritized political stability and male authority over female autonomy and dignity. Stay until the end, because what you'll learn will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Ottoman civilization. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to support a fellow history enthusiast, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I'm always amazed by how far these stories reach. Now let us return to Istanbul in 1623 and discover how Fatma Sultan came to be sitting on that floor, screaming. But first, we must understand the palace itself and the dual reality it created for the women who lived within its walls. Topkapi Palace was not merely a residence. It was a political machine designed to concentrate and maintain Ottoman power through architectural, administrative, and social mechanisms that reinforced the Sultan's absolute authority. Construction began in 1461 after Mehmed the Conqueror took Constantinople. Over the following centuries, successive sultans expanded and refined the complex until it covered approximately 700,000 square meters. The palace contained schools for training administrators, barracks for elite military units, treasuries holding wealth from 3 continents, and the imperial harem where the sultan's family lived in carefully regulated isolation. The harem was not a brothel, despite European fantasies that imagined it as such. It was a complex institution that served multiple functions simultaneously. It housed the sultan's mother, wives, daughters, and concubines. It trained women for administrative roles within the palace. It educated young girls in arts, music, and languages. It demonstrated Ottoman wealth and power through the accumulation of beautiful women from throughout the empire. And it served as a carefully controlled environment where royal women lived their entire lives from birth to death without ever experiencing genuine autonomy. The physical structure reflected this complexity. The harem occupied approximately 400 rooms spread across multiple courtyards. Some areas were luxurious beyond imagination with marble fountains, gilded ceilings, and windows of colored glass. Other areas were simple, functional spaces where servants lived and worked. The architectural variety created hierarchy that was visible in where different women were permitted to reside. At the top of this hierarchy sat the Valad Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She exercised enormous power over all other harem women. She controlled who had access to the Sultan. She arranged marriages for his daughters. She supervised the education of his children. She managed the harem's substantial budget. She was in practical terms the most powerful woman in the empire. Below the Valid Sultan ranked the Sultan's wives and favorites. These women competed for the Sultan's attention because favor meant power, resources, and security for their children. The competition created political dynamics that were as complex as anything occurring in the outer court, where male officials vied for positions and influence. Below the wives came the concubines, women who might be called to the Sultan's chambers or might spend their entire lives in service without such elevation. Below them came the servants, slaves purchased or captured who performed the labor that maintained the harem's operations. And overseeing everything were the eunuchs, castrated males, who served as guards, administrators, and the only men besides the Sultan permitted regular access to the harem. This hierarchy was enforced through architecture, doors that only certain ranks could pass, courtyards where different classes of women gathered, living quarters whose luxury or simplicity reflected status. The physical space made power relationships visible and inescapable. The daughters of the Sultan occupied an ambiguous position within this structure. They were born to enormous privilege. They received the finest education available to women in the Ottoman Empire. They wore clothing that cost fortunes. They lived in luxury that most people could not imagine. They were called sultana, princess, and treated with elaborate respect by everyone around them. But they were also property of the state. Their futures were determined entirely by political calculations made by the sultan and his advisors. They would marry when told to marry. They would marry whom they were told to marry. They would produce children who would cement alliances or create new ties between the throne and powerful families. Their value derived from their utility to the dynasty, not from any inherent rights or individual desires. This created a dual reality that shaped every aspect of their lives. They were simultaneously privileged and powerless, honored and controlled, living in luxury while existing in a cage whose bars were made of ceremony, custom, and the absolute authority of the Sultan, who was both their father and their owner. The period known as the Sultanate of Women, roughly from 1540 to 1680, represented the height of female influence in Ottoman politics. During these decades, the Valide Sultan and the Sultan's favorites exercised real power over imperial policy. They influenced appointments. They shaped foreign relations. They accumulated wealth and patronage networks that rivaled those of male officials. But this power was always conditional. It existed only through relationships with powerful men. It could be revoked instantly. And it came at costs that the official records celebrating female achievement systematically excluded from discussion. The marriage of imperial princesses was central to the dynasty's political strategy. Unlike European monarchies where royal daughters married foreign princes to cement international alliances, Ottoman princesses married within the empire to powerful passes, viziers, and provincial governors. These marriages created bonds between the palace and the military administrative elite that governed the vast Ottoman territories. The benefits were clear from the state's perspective. A pasha married to an imperial princess gained prestige and connection to the royal family. He became invested in the dynasty's survival because his own children would carry royal blood. He could be trusted with more power because his loyalty was secured through marriage ties. The princess became living guarantee of his allegiance. For the princess herself, the calculation was different. She was being permanently separated from her birth family and sent to live with a man she had likely never met. She was expected to produce children who would further entangle the Pasha's family with the dynasty. She was representing the Sultan's authority in her husband's household, demonstrating proper Ottoman behavior and ensuring that her husband remained loyal. The marriage was transaction, not relationship. The princess was a valuable component being transferred from one part of the political machinery to another. Her feelings about this transaction were irrelevant to everyone except herself. The preparation for this role began years before any specific marriage was arranged. Young princesses understood from early childhood that they would eventually marry powerful men chosen by their father. They were taught that this was honor, that representing the dynasty through marriage was their highest duty, that obedience to the Sultan's will was sacred obligation. But knowing abstractly that marriage would be arranged and actually experiencing the reality of that arrangement were different.